My son smiled as he signed the papers that would erase me. Early dementia, Daniel said calmly, like he was describing the weather. I sat there in a place that smelled like bleach and quiet despair, watching strangers nod as if I were already gone. But I wasn't. When the young doctor stepped close enough, I slipped a folded note into his hand with fingers that did not shake. I am not safe. Please call the police before my son takes everything. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time that day, I felt something shift. If you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if this moment made your heart tighten even a little, stay with me and don't forget to like and subscribe. You're not alone in this. My name is Charlotte Bennett, and until a few months ago, I believed I had lived a quiet, ordinary life, the kind you don't question because nothing ever seems broken enough to demand it. I was a librarian for 32 years in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. I spent most of my life surrounded by stories, people escaping into them, finding comfort in them, sometimes hiding inside them. I suppose I did the same. I married my husband Thomas when I was 26. He was steady, kind, and patient in ways that made the world feel less sharp. We built our life slowly, a modest house, a small garden, Sunday dinners, and a rhythm that never needed explaining. And we had one son, Daniel. When Daniel was little, he was the kind of child who clung to my hand in grocery stores and asked questions about everything: why the sky changed colors, why birds didn't get lost, why people lied. I used to believe that last question meant something about his character, that he would grow into a man who valued truth. Somewhere along the way, that boy disappeared. Or maybe I just stopped seeing clearly. After Thomas passed away 3 years ago, the silence in the house became something alive. It settled into the walls, into the empty chair at the dining table, into the bed that suddenly felt too large. Grief doesn't come all at once. It stretches itself across time, slipping into moments you don't expect. I found myself reaching for Daniel more than I had in years, calling him for small things I used to handle alone. At first, he seemed to welcome it. He started visiting more often, bringing groceries, fixing things around the house, insisting on driving me to appointments. "You shouldn't be doing all this alone, Mom," he would say, his tone gentle, almost protective. Melissa, his wife, came along, sometimes smiling politely, always watching. Looking back now, I realize that was the beginning. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with little things: Daniel offering to organize my bills because it would be easier setting up online accounts so I wouldn't have to worry, suggesting I let him handle certain paperwork after Thomas's death because it was too much stress. At the time, it felt like relief. I trusted him. Of course I did. He was my son. Then came the day everything changed, though I didn't know it yet. It was mid-July, one of those suffocating Ohio afternoons where the air feels too heavy to breathe. I had been working in the garden longer than I should have determined to keep up with the routines Thomas and I had built together. I remember feeling lightheaded, the world tilting slightly at the edges. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. Daniel was already there. He stood at the foot of the bed, talking to a nurse, in a voice that sounded different, controlled, certain, as if he had already decided what had happened before anyone asked. "She's been getting confused lately," he said. "Forgetting things, leaving the stove on." I tried to interrupt to correct him, but my throat felt dry, my body slow. The nurse nodded, writing something down. "No," I managed finally, my voice thin. "That's not." Daniel stepped closer, placing a hand gently on my arm. To anyone watching, it would have looked like comfort. "Mom," he said softly, "it's okay. Just rest." But his eyes didn't match his voice. There was something else there. Something calculating. The doctor who examined me later was brisk but not unkind. He explained that I had likely fainted from dehydration and heat exhaustion. He mentioned mild concern about memory, something to monitor, not something to panic over. "Follow up with your primary care physician," he said. "We'll keep an eye on things." That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because Daniel told the story differently. To Melissa, to neighbors, to people at church. Even I later learned to professionals who had no reason to doubt him. "She's not herself anymore," he would say. "We're worried it's early dementia." At first, I thought it was just concern. Misguided maybe, but still rooted in care. Until I started noticing the way people looked at me. The pauses when I spoke. The gentle corrections. The quiet assumption that anything I said might not be entirely reliable. That was when I began writing things down. It started as a small habit: dates, times, conversations. I would jot notes in the margins of old recipe cards on scraps of paper tucked into books on the backs of envelopes. Not because I was losing my memory, but because I was afraid someone was trying to rewrite it for me. There's a difference. I knew who I was. I knew what I remembered. But something in my life no longer felt solid, and I needed proof, if not for anyone else, then for myself. Daniel didn't like that. "Mom, you don't need to do that," he said one afternoon when he saw me writing at the kitchen table. "It's just going to make you anxious." "I'm not anxious," I replied calmly. "I just like keeping track of things." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've always been like this," he said, "holding on to details that don't matter." But they did matter. They mattered more than anything. Because the more I paid attention, the more I saw. I saw how Daniel started answering questions directed at me before I could speak. I saw how Melissa would exchange quick glances with him when I said something they didn't expect. I saw how decisions were being made around me, about me, without me. And slowly, quietly, something inside me began to shift, not into confusion, but into awareness. I wasn't forgetting things. I was being erased. And once you realize that someone is trying to take your voice away, you start listening very carefully to everything they say, because somewhere hidden in their words is the truth they don't think you'll catch. And I was starting to catch everything. If there is one thing I have learned in my life, it is this: people rarely reveal their true intentions all at once. They introduce them slowly, wrapped in kindness, disguised as care, until you no longer recognize the moment when something good turned into something dangerous. That was exactly how Daniel and Melissa changed. After my hospital visit, they became present, more than they had been in years. At first, it felt like something I had secretly wished for without admitting it. Daniel began stopping by almost every day. He brought groceries I didn't ask for, replaced light bulbs I hadn't noticed were out, and fixed things that weren't broken. Melissa followed with her own version of helpfulness. She reorganized my kitchen one afternoon while I was resting. When I came downstairs, everything had been moved: plates, spices, even the utensils I had kept in the same drawer for over 20 years. "I thought it would be easier for you," she said with a bright, practiced smile. I stood there staring at cabinets that no longer felt like mine. "I knew where everything was," I replied quietly. Melissa laughed, light and dismissive. "Well, now you'll get used to a better system." A better system. That phrase stayed with me longer than it should have. It wasn't just about the kitchen. It was about control. Little by little, they began adjusting pieces of my life as if I were no longer capable of arranging them myself. Daniel started managing my medications. At first, he simply reminded me to take them. Then he brought over one of those plastic pill organizers neatly labeled by day and time. "It's safer this way," he said. "You don't want to mix anything up." "I've been taking my medication correctly for years," I told him. "I know," he replied quickly. "This is just extra precaution." Extra precaution became routine. Routine became expectation. And expectation slowly became something I was no longer allowed to question. Then came the car. One morning, Daniel casually mentioned that maybe I shouldn't be driving for a while. "Just until we're sure everything's okay," he added, as if that made it temporary. "I am sure everything's okay," I said more firmly this time. He sighed the way people do when they believe they are being patient with someone unreasonable. "Mom, you fainted. What if it happens again while you're on the road?" That was a fair question. But it wasn't the only one. "What if it doesn't?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached for my keys on the counter, turning them over in his hand like they already belonged to him. "Let me hold on to these for now," he said. "For now." Another phrase that lingered. I let him take them. That was my mistake. Because once something is taken for now, it rarely comes back. After that, leaving the house became something that required coordination. Daniel would drive me to appointments. Melissa would offer to pick up things I needed. They always framed it as convenience, as protection, as love. But love doesn't make you feel smaller. And I was beginning to feel very small. The house, once filled with quiet independence, started to feel like a place where I was being gently managed. And then there were the conversations, or rather the way I was slowly removed from them. At first it was subtle. Daniel and Melissa would speak to each other in low voices while I was in the room, as if they assumed I wasn't paying attention. "She didn't remember that from last week," Melissa whispered once. Daniel nodded. "It's getting worse." I was standing less than 10 feet away. "I can hear you," I said. Melissa turned to me with a soft, almost pitying expression. "We know, Charlotte. We're just worried about you." Worried. Always worried. Never listening. They began speaking about me instead of to me, making decisions in front of me as if I were already absent. Sometimes they would lower their voices. Other times they wouldn't bother at all. And then came the moment that changed everything. It happened on a quiet afternoon when I was upstairs folding laundry. Daniel and Melissa were in the kitchen below. I hadn't meant to listen, but their voices carried clearly through the open space of the house. "Is the house fully paid off?" Melissa asked. There was a pause. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "Dad made sure of that years ago, and it's in her name now. Technically, yes," he said, "but that can change." I froze. Not because I didn't understand what they were saying, but because I understood it perfectly. There was something in Daniel's tone, not hesitation, not uncertainty, but calculation, as if he had already thought through the steps, the process, the outcome. Melissa spoke again, quieter this time, but still clear enough. "We need to move sooner rather than later," she said, "before anything gets complicated." My hands tightened around the fabric I was holding. Complicated. What did that mean? And more importantly, what were they planning to do before it became complicated? I stayed very still, listening. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I know. I'm working on it." Working on it. On what? The question circled in my mind, sharp and relentless. I wanted to walk downstairs, confront them, demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Instinct. The same quiet instinct that had led me to start writing things down. If I confronted them now, they would deny everything. They would smile, soften their voices, turn my suspicion into proof of the very instability they were already building around me. No, I needed to understand more. I needed to see the whole picture. So I did something I never thought I would do in my own home. I stayed silent. From that day forward, I watched them differently. I paid attention to every glance they exchanged, every conversation that stopped when I entered a room, every decision made without my input. I listened not just to what they said, but to what they avoided saying. And slowly, the pattern began to reveal itself. This wasn't concern. This wasn't care. This was preparation. Preparation for something that involved my house, my life, and my voice being removed from both. And once you realize that someone is preparing to take something from you, you begin to prepare as well. Not loudly, not dramatically, but carefully, quietly, and with purpose. That was when my notes changed. They were no longer just reminders. They became records, evidence, proof that I was still here, still thinking, still aware, because deep down I knew something they didn't. They believed I was fading, but I was becoming sharper than I had ever been, and I was going to need that clarity for what was coming next. There is a particular kind of fear that doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, piece by piece, until one day you realize you are no longer reacting to events, you are anticipating them. That was where I found myself after the conversation I overheard. I stopped moving through my home as its owner and began moving through it as an observer. Every room felt like it held something I had missed. Every interaction with Daniel and Melissa felt layered, like there was always a second meaning hidden beneath their words. And then came the incident that gave them exactly what they needed. It was late August, hotter than usual for that time of year. I had opened the windows early that morning, hoping for a breeze that never came. By midday, the air inside the house had turned thick and heavy. I remember standing in the kitchen holding a glass of water when a wave of dizziness hit me stronger than anything I had felt before. I tried to steady myself against the counter. The next moment slipped away from me. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in a hospital room. But this time, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just an accident. This was an opportunity for them. Daniel was already there, sitting close to the bed, his posture attentive, his expression carefully arranged into concern. Melissa stood near the window, arms crossed, watching everything with quiet calculation. "She passed out again," Daniel was telling the nurse. "It's been happening more often." More often. That wasn't true. I had fainted once before. Once. I tried to speak, but my voice felt slow, like it had to push through something thick. "That's not accurate," I said, forcing the words out. Daniel leaned forward immediately, his tone soft, almost soothing. "Mom, it's okay. You don't have to argue about it right now." I turned my head toward the nurse. "I'm not arguing," I said. "I'm correcting. The nurse hesitated, pen hovering above her chart, her eyes flicking between me and Daniel. Daniel gave a small, apologetic smile. "She gets like this," he said gently. "She doesn't always realize what's happening." That sentence landed harder than anything else, not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily they were accepted. Something I couldn't control. Later, a different doctor came in, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a voice that suggested he had seen too many situations like this to question them deeply. He asked me a series of standard questions: my name, the date, where I was. I answered all of them correctly, without hesitation, without confusion. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Looks like dehydration and heat exhaustion again," he said. "We'll run a few tests, but I don't see anything immediately alarming." Again, that word again slipped into the conversation as if it had always belonged there. I opened my mouth to correct him. But Daniel spoke first. "She's been having memory issues too," he added. "Small things, but they're getting worse." The doctor glanced at me. "Have you noticed that, Charlotte?" I held his gaze. "I've noticed people saying it," I replied carefully. "That's not the same thing." There was a brief pause. Not long enough to change anything. Just long enough for me to understand that I was losing ground. The doctor gave a neutral nod. "We'll recommend follow-up testing," he said. "Nothing definitive at this point. Nothing definitive." That should have been enough to stop everything that came after. But it wasn't. Because Daniel didn't need a definitive diagnosis. He only needed a narrative. And he was building one piece by piece in front of people who had no reason to question him. When we left the hospital, he took control immediately. "I'll handle the follow-up appointments," he said. "You don't need to worry about scheduling." I didn't argue, not out loud, but something inside me had shifted permanently. This wasn't concern anymore. This was strategy. Over the next few weeks, I watched that strategy unfold. Daniel began speaking to others about my condition with increasing certainty. To neighbors, he described me as forgetful. To friends, he suggested I was becoming confused. To anyone who would listen, he planted the same idea over and over again until it started to feel like truth, even to people who had known me for years. And the most dangerous part was how subtle it all was. He never said I was completely incapable. He never used words like incompetent or unstable. Not yet. He didn't need to. He was laying the foundation first, so that when the time came, no one would question it. That was when I changed how I documented everything. Before, my notes had been simple reminders. Now, they became something else entirely. I began writing down dates and times with precision, every conversation, every inconsistency, every moment where Daniel or Melissa said something that didn't align with reality. I wrote about the hospital visit. I wrote about what the doctor actually said. I wrote about how Daniel rephrased it afterward. I didn't trust my memory to be the only record anymore, so I created another one. And I hid it, not in one place, but everywhere. Inside the pages of old cookbooks I rarely used, tucked into the lining of my winter coats, slipped between photographs and albums no one had opened in years. I even wrote small notes to myself, short direct reminders in case something ever happened that made me question my own understanding. You are not confused. You are being watched. Pay attention. It may sound extreme, but when someone begins to rewrite your reality, you either accept it or you fight to preserve your own. I chose to fight, quietly, carefully, because I knew something Daniel didn't. He believed I was becoming weaker. But in truth, I was becoming more aware than ever before. And awareness, when used correctly, can be more powerful than anything else, even against someone who thinks they are already winning. What I didn't know yet was just how far Daniel was willing to go. The moment you stop doubting your instincts is the moment everything becomes clearer and far more dangerous. By early September, I no longer questioned whether something was wrong. I knew it was. The only thing I didn't know yet was how far Daniel and Melissa had already gone. And then one afternoon I found out. It happened quietly, almost accidentally. Daniel had come over earlier than usual that day. I heard him in my study, my husband's old room, the one I rarely entered anymore because it still smelled faintly of his cologne and old paper. Daniel had no reason to be in there without asking. But when I walked down the hallway, I saw the door slightly ajar. I slowed my steps, not out of fear, out of instinct. Inside, Daniel stood near the desk, his back to me. Papers were spread across the surface, organized in neat stacks, too neat for something casual. When he heard the floor creak beneath my foot, he turned quickly, his hand moving in a reflex I recognized immediately. He was hiding something. "Oh, hey, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Just looking through some of Dad's old documents. Thought I might help sort things out." I glanced at the desk. "You didn't ask," I said. "I didn't think I needed to," he replied lightly. "I'm just trying to help." Help! That word again. I held his gaze for a moment longer than he expected. Then I nodded slowly as if I believed him. "Of course," I said. "Thank you." He relaxed just enough, but not completely. That told me everything. I didn't confront him. Not then. Because I understood something now that I hadn't before. If I pushed too soon, I would lose the advantage I had only just begun to build. So I waited. That evening, after Daniel and Melissa left, I went into the study. I closed the door behind me. And I searched. Not like someone looking for misplaced keys. Like someone looking for proof. I started with the desk. The drawers were too clean, too organized. Daniel had already been careful there. But careful people often miss the small things, the places they assume no one will check. I moved to the file cabinet. Most of the folders were familiar: tax returns, insurance documents, old receipts Thomas had insisted on keeping. But toward the back, there was a folder I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled. That alone was enough to make my pulse quicken. I opened it slowly. Inside were photocopies. At first glance, they looked official: legal forms, structured language, signature lines. But it didn't take long for my stomach to drop. Power of attorney documents, with my name, and a signature that was supposed to be mine, but wasn't. I stared at it, my hands suddenly cold. It looked close enough that someone who didn't know me well might accept it. The shape of the letters was similar, the flow almost right, but it wasn't mine. I knew how I signed my name. I had been doing it for over 60 years. This was imitation. Careful, practiced imitation. But still wrong. I turned the page. There were more. Different versions. Different dates. Slight variations in the signature, as if someone had been trying to perfect it. Practicing. My son had been practicing forging my name. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with something far worse. Clarity. I flipped further into the folder. And that was when I saw it. A brochure. Cheap paper. Faded ink. A photograph of a building that looked more like an abandoned motel than a medical facility. Residential Behavioral Care Center, it read in bold letters. Below it, smaller text: long-term placement available. Affordable options for families. Families. The word felt like a knife. I scanned the page quickly. Shared rooms. Limited supervision. Medication management. No mention of therapy. No mention of recovery. Just containment. Storage. A place to put someone away. I sat down slowly in Thomas's old chair, the paper still in my hands. This wasn't a possibility anymore. This was a plan. And it was already in motion. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The betrayal. The disbelief. The quiet, crushing weight of understanding that the child I had raised, protected, and loved without condition was now calculating how to remove me from my own life. Then I stood up. Because I didn't have time to fall apart. Not yet. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Every page, every folder, every detail. When you discover something like that, your first instinct is to act, to confront, to demand answers, to force the truth into the open. But I knew better now. Daniel wasn't guessing. He wasn't improvising. He was planning. And if I wanted to survive what he had planned for me, I needed to be just as careful. The next day, I chose to speak to Melissa instead. Not Daniel. Melissa. Because Daniel would expect confrontation. Melissa wouldn't. I found her alone in the kitchen that afternoon, standing by the counter, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting instantly into polite attentiveness. "Charlotte," she said, "do you need something?" I noticed the way she said my name. Not Mom. Not warmth. Just distance. "I was going through some paperwork," I said calmly, watching her closely. "I found something I didn't recognize." Her posture stiffened just slightly. "What kind of paperwork?" she asked. "Legal documents," I replied. "Power of attorney forms." Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. But it was enough. "I'm sure Daniel was just preparing things," she said quickly. You know, in case you ever need help." "In case I need help," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "It's responsible." I stepped closer. "And the facility brochure?" I asked. This time she didn't answer immediately. She set her phone down slowly, her expression changing. The politeness faded, the softness disappeared. What remained was something colder, more honest. "You need more care than you think," she said. The words were calm, flat, final, not concern, not suggestion, a statement. I felt something settle inside me at that moment, not fear, not confusion. "You've already decided that," I said quietly. Melissa held my gaze. "Someone has to," she replied. That was the moment everything became undeniable. This wasn't Daniel acting alone. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was agreement, a shared plan, a decision already made about my life without me. I nodded slowly. "I see," I said. And I meant it, because now I truly did. I turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned the most important thing I needed to know. They weren't going to stop, and if I didn't act soon, they were going to succeed. Once you understand that someone has already decided your future without you, something inside you changes. You stop waiting for permission. You stop hoping they'll come to their senses. And most importantly, you stop assuming you still have time. Because time, I realized, was exactly what I was running out of. After my conversation with Melissa, I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house that had once felt like my safest place. Every creak of wood, every shift of air felt different now, like I was no longer alone in a space that belonged to me. I wasn't imagining danger anymore. I was living inside it. By morning, I had made a decision. If Daniel and Melissa were planning something, I needed someone outside of their control to know what was happening. Someone who knew me. Someone who would believe me. Lorraine. We had been friends for over 20 years. We met at church, bonded over shared routines, shared grief, shared seasons of life. She had seen me through Thomas's illness, through his passing, through the long quiet afterward. If anyone could recognize that something was wrong, it was her. I waited until late morning when I knew Daniel would be at work, or at least where he claimed to be. I picked up the phone and dialed her number, my hand steady in a way that surprised me. It rang twice. Charlotte Lorraine's voice came through, warm and familiar. "Everything okay?" For a moment I almost broke, not because I was weak, but because it had been so long since someone spoke to me like I was still myself. "I need to see you," I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. "Of course," she said immediately. "What's going on? I don't think I should say it over the phone," I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. "Charlotte," she said carefully, "you're not scaring me for no reason, are you?" I closed my eyes briefly. "I think Daniel is trying to put me somewhere," I said, "and I don't think I'll be able to leave." Silence. "Then I'm coming over," Lorraine said firmly. "Right now." Relief washed through me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. "I'll be here," I said. We hung up, and that was when I heard the front door open. My heart dropped. "Mom," Daniel's voice called out from the hallway. "You home? He wasn't supposed to be there." "Not yet." I stood frozen for a second, the phone still in my hand. Then I forced myself to move. "I'm in the kitchen," I called back, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Daniel appeared in the doorway a moment later, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. "Who were you on the phone with?" he asked. The question came too quickly, too directly. "Lorraine," I said, not giving myself time to hesitate. His jaw tightened slightly. "What did you need to talk to her about?" There it was. Not curiosity, control. "I wanted to see her," I replied. "That's allowed, isn't it?" Daniel stepped further into the room, his presence filling the space in a way that felt deliberate. "Of course it's allowed," he said. "I just wish you'd tell me these things." "I'm trying to help you, Mom." I met his eyes. "And I'm trying to live my life," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled slowly, as if choosing his next words carefully. "You don't always make the best decisions right now," he said. "That's all I'm saying." There it was again. The narrative. The quiet rewriting of who I was. "I think I'm doing just fine," I replied. Daniel studied me for a second longer. Then he smiled. But it wasn't warmth. It was calculation. "Well," he said lightly, "maybe we can talk about that later." He turned and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there, my pulse racing. Something had shifted. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Lorraine never made it to my house that day, because 20 minutes later my phone stopped working. At first I thought it was a simple issue, battery signal, something small. But when I tried to call out, nothing connected. No tone, no response. Just silence. I walked into the living room and checked the landline. The cord had been unplugged, deliberately. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I understood. This wasn't coincidence. This was containment. Daniel wasn't just planning something anymore. He was actively controlling my access to the outside world. I moved quickly after that, not in panic, but with purpose. I went to my room and pulled out the cardigan I had worn the previous week, the one with the loose inner seam I had noticed months ago but never fixed. I sat down on the edge of the bed and carefully opened the stitching just enough to slide something inside. A note, not a long one, not detailed, just enough. I am being taken against my will. I am not mentally unstable. Please call the police. I folded it tightly and tucked it deep into the lining. Then I sewed the seam closed again. Not perfectly, but well enough that it wouldn't be noticed unless someone was looking for it. That note wasn't for Daniel or Melissa. It was for the moment I knew was coming, the moment when they would try to move me somewhere I didn't choose. Because now I was certain of one thing: they were going to act soon, and when they did, I might not have another chance to speak for myself. The rest of that day passed in a strange, heavy silence. Daniel stayed in the house longer than usual, moving from room to room, making calls I couldn't hear, watching me in ways he probably thought were subtle. Melissa arrived later in the afternoon. They spoke in low voices in the living room, their words blending into something indistinct but urgent. Every so often, one of them would glance toward me. Not openly, but enough. They weren't hiding it anymore. Not really. Because in their minds, I was already losing the ability to understand what was happening. That was their mistake. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I realized something with absolute clarity. I had waited too long to hope they would stop. Now I had only one option left: to be ready. Because the next move wouldn't be small. It wouldn't be subtle. It would be final. And when it came, I would either disappear quietly into whatever place they had chosen for me, or I would find a way to be heard. There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when fear stops feeling like panic and becomes something colder, clearer. That was the state I woke up in the next morning. Not confused. Not frightened in the way they expected. Prepared. The house felt different when I stepped into the hallway. Not louder, not busier, just watched. As if every movement I made was already anticipated. Daniel was in the kitchen. Of course he was. He stood by the counter, pouring coffee into a mug I recognized as Thomas's. He had never used that mug before. Not once in all the years Thomas was alive. That detail mattered, because people reveal their intentions in what they choose to take. "Morning, Mom," he said casually, not looking up right away. "Good morning," I replied, keeping my tone even. Melissa sat at the table, scrolling through her phone. She didn't greet me, just glanced up briefly, then back down again. Something had shifted overnight. The politeness was gone. What remained was efficiency. "We have an appointment today," Daniel said, finally meeting my eyes. "What kind of appointment?" I asked. "Specialist," he replied. "Follow-up from the hospital." The lie was smooth. Practiced. "And where is this specialist?" I asked. "About an hour away," he said. That was all he offered. No name, no details, no room for questions. I nodded slowly as if accepting it. "What time?" I asked. "We should leave in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Not enough time to call anyone. Not enough time to leave. Not enough time to prepare unless you already had." I turned without another word and walked back to my room. Inside, I moved quickly but deliberately. I put on the cardigan, the one with the note sewn into the lining. I checked the seam once more, pressing my fingers lightly against the fabric. The paper was still there, still hidden, still waiting. Then I added one more thing, a small slip of paper in my pocket with Lorraine's phone number written clearly in pen. Not because I thought I would have time to call her, but because if someone else needed to, they could. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the room. For a moment I saw the woman they believed I had become. Fragile, confused, dependent. Then I looked closer, and I saw something else. Awake. When I returned to the kitchen, Daniel was already holding my purse. "I'll take that," he said. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached out and took it back gently. "I can carry my own things," I said. A small moment. But it mattered. He hesitated, then handed it over. "Of course," he said. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. He didn't like losing even that small piece of control. We left the house together. Daniel in the driver's seat, Melissa in the passenger seat, me in the back, like a passenger in my own life. The drive started quietly. The roads at first were familiar streets I had driven hundreds of times, landmarks I could recognize without thinking. But after 20 minutes, things began to change. The turns became less predictable. The buildings more worn. The neighborhoods quieter in a way that didn't feel peaceful. It felt forgotten. I watched carefully. Every street sign, every exit. Not because I thought I would escape, but because knowing where you are matters even when you have no control over where you're going. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked again. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Like I said," he replied, eventually a specialist. "What's the name?" I pressed. Melissa spoke, this time her voice flat. "Charlotte, you're going to make this harder than it needs to be. Harder. Not clearer, not safer, harder." That told me everything. We drove another 15 minutes before the building came into view. And the moment I saw it, I knew. This wasn't a hospital. It wasn't a clinic. It wasn't anything that resembled care. It was a low rectangular structure with faded paint and narrow windows. The sign out front was old, the lettering chipped and uneven. Residential Behavioral Care Center. The same name from the brochure. My chest tightened, but not from panic. From confirmation. This was it. Daniel pulled into the parking lot. "Come on," he said, stepping out of the car. Melissa followed. I remained seated for a moment longer. Just one, because I understood something now that couldn't be undone. If I walked inside that building without a plan, I might never walk out again. So I took a breath, slow, controlled. Then I opened the door and stepped out. The air outside felt heavier here. Still, as if even the world around this place had stopped expecting anything good. Daniel walked ahead, holding the door open. "After you," he said. Polite, almost kind. I stepped past him and into the building. The smell hit me immediately. Bleach, strong enough to burn the back of my throat. Underneath it, something else. Something older. Neglect. The reception area was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering slightly. A woman sat behind the desk, barely looking up as we approached. "Intake?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." "Charlotte Bennett." He said my name like it belonged to paperwork, not to me. The woman typed something into her computer. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing vaguely toward a row of worn chairs. We sat. I watched. Patients moved slowly through the hallway beyond the desk. Some shuffled. Some stared. None of them looked present. None of them looked like they had chosen to be there. A man in the corner rocked back and forth, muttering to himself. A nurse walked past without looking at him. I felt it then. Not fear, but urgency. This was not a place for healing. This was a place for disappearing. After a few minutes, a staff member called us back. "Charlotte," I stood. Daniel stepped closer to me, his hand hovering near my arm, not touching but ready, guiding, controlling. We followed the staff member down a narrow hallway into a small office. "Just a few questions," the woman said, pulling out a clipboard. Daniel answered most of them before I could speak. "She's been confused. She wanders. She forgets where she is." Each statement landed like a stone, heavy, deliberate, untrue. I opened my mouth to correct him. But then, the door opened. A young doctor stepped inside. And everything shifted. Because he didn't look at Daniel first. He looked at me. Directly. Fully. As if I were still here. And in that moment I knew. This was my only chance. There are moments in life when everything narrows down to a single decision. Not a dramatic one. Not loud. Not even visible to anyone else. Just one quiet choice that determines whether you disappear or remain. When the young doctor stepped into the room, I felt that moment settle over me. He couldn't have been more than 30. Clean-cut, tired eyes, the kind of exhaustion that comes from working too many hours in a place that takes more than it gives. His name badge read Dr. Ethan Carter. But what mattered wasn't his name. It was how he looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, professional. "I'm Dr. Carter. I'll be handling the intake evaluation." Daniel immediately stepped forward. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his tone shifting into something softer, almost rehearsed. "We've been really worried about her." Of course he had. I watched Dr. Carter carefully. He nodded, but his attention didn't stay on Daniel for long. Instead, he pulled a chair closer and sat down in front of me. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "how are you feeling today?" A simple question. But the way he asked it mattered. There was space in it. Permission. "I'm clear," I said. "Not fine, not okay. Clear." Something flickered in his expression, a small reaction, but real. Behind me, I could feel Daniel's tension shift. "She says that sometimes," he added quickly, "but it doesn't always line up with reality." Dr. Carter didn't respond to that immediately. Instead, he kept his eyes on me. "Do you know where you are right now?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm in a residential behavioral facility that I did not consent to being admitted to." Silence. Daniel let out a short, strained laugh. "You see what I mean," he said. "She gets fixated on things." "I'm not fixated," I interrupted, still looking at Dr. Carter. "I'm stating a fact." That was when something shifted more noticeably. Not dramatically, but enough. Dr. Carter leaned back slightly, his posture changing just a fraction, as if he was no longer following a script. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's take this one step at a time." He turned to Daniel. "I'm going to need to speak with your mother alone for part of this evaluation." Daniel hesitated. "Only for a second, but I saw it." "Is that necessary?" he asked. "Yes, doctor," Carter replied, his tone polite but firm. "It's standard procedure." Melissa spoke up this time. "We just want to make sure she's safe," she said. "And I want to make sure I'm getting accurate information," Dr. Carter responded. Another pause. Then Daniel nodded. "Of course," he said. "We'll be right outside." They stepped out of the room. The door closed behind them. And for the first time since we arrived, I was alone with someone who might actually listen. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of possibility. Full of risk. Full of the understanding that whatever I did next would determine everything. "Doctor." Carter turned his chair slightly toward me. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's talk." I didn't move right away, because I needed to be certain, not about him, about timing. There are moments when acting too soon can be just as dangerous as waiting too long, but this was the moment. I shifted slightly in my seat, my hand moving slowly to the inside seam of my cardigan. Careful, deliberate. I slid my fingers into the lining, feeling for the small fold of paper hidden there. Still there. I pulled it free. Dr. Carter noticed the movement. His eyes followed my hand. I didn't speak. I just held the note out to him. For a brief second, he didn't take it. Not because he didn't want to, but because he understood that whatever was written on that paper mattered. Then he reached forward and took it. He unfolded it carefully. Read it once, then again. And as he did, something in his face changed. Not fear, not disbelief, recognition. He looked up at me, really looked. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. No hesitation, no embellishment, just truth. "My son is trying to place me here so he can take control of my assets," I continued. "I did not agree to this. I am not mentally unstable. And if I am admitted, I don't know if I will be able to get out." The words came out steady, measured, because panic wouldn't help me now. Clarity would. Dr. Carter didn't interrupt. He listened. And then he did something that told me everything I needed to know. He asked questions. Not leading ones. Not dismissive ones. Precise ones. "Are you currently taking any medications for cognitive decline?" he asked. "No." "Have you been diagnosed with any neurological condition that affects your decision-making capacity?" "No." "Did you sign any documents agreeing to voluntary admission?" "No." Each answer sharpened the situation. Each question built something, not just understanding, evidence. Dr. Carter stood up, walked to the desk, picked up the file that had been prepared for my intake. He flipped through it quickly, and then he stopped. His brow furrowed. He flipped back a page, then forward again. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned the file slightly so I could see part of it. Medication list. Names I didn't recognize. dosages I had never taken. These medications, he said slowly, are listed as part of your current treatment plan. They're not mine, I said. I can see that, he replied. He turned another page. Behavioral reports, descriptions, patterns, all written in the same tone, the same structure, almost identical. These reports, he murmured. They're not accurate, I said. They're not even varied, he replied. That was when the final piece clicked into place. Not just for me, for him. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't miscommunication. This was construction, a story being built, and now it was starting to fall apart. Dr. Carter closed the file, slowly, carefully. Then he looked at me again. You did the right thing, he said. 4 words. Simple. But they carried more weight than anything else that had happened that day, because for the first time, someone believed me. What happens now? I asked. He didn't hesitate. I'm going to pause your admission, he said, and I'm going to make some calls. What kind of calls? I asked. He held my gaze, the kind that makes sure you're protected. Outside the door, I could hear movement. Daniel, Melissa, waiting, expecting everything to go exactly as planned. They had brought me here thinking I would disappear quietly, that no one would question it, that no one would listen. But they made one mistake. They didn't realize I had already prepared for this moment, and now so had someone else. There is a particular kind of silence that follows the moment truth is recognized. It isn't peaceful, it's charged. That was the silence in the room after Dr. Carter closed the file. Not empty, but full of consequences that hadn't yet arrived. He didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed. He didn't panic, didn't react impulsively, didn't look toward the door as if expecting confrontation. Instead, he moved with a kind of controlled precision, the kind that comes from understanding both the seriousness of a situation and the need to handle it correctly. I'm going to step out for a moment, he said quietly. But you're not being admitted right now. Do you understand that? Yes, I replied, and you are not to be moved anywhere without my approval. There was something deliberate in the way he said it. Not just reassurance, a boundary. I nodded. Good, he said. Stay here. He walked to the door, paused briefly, then opened it. I heard Daniel's voice immediately. So, is everything okay, Eager? Too eager, Doctor. Carter stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him just enough that their voices became muffled, but not entirely inaudible. I couldn't make out every word, but I didn't need to. Tone tells you more than language ever will. At first, Daniel sounded calm, controlled, still playing the role he had built so carefully. She's been getting worse, he said. We're really concerned about her safety. Then, Dr. Carter's voice, steady, professional. I'll need to review some things before proceeding. A pause. Then Melissa. What kind of things? Short, sharp, impatient. Another pause. Longer this time. And then, you listed medications that she denies taking, Dr. Carter said. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. That must be a mistake, Daniel replied quickly. She forgets what she's on. She answered all orientation questions correctly, Dr. Carter continued. That doesn't mean. It means I need to verify before making any decisions. The shift was happening, slowly, but clearly. Daniel's tone changed. Less controlled, more defensive. Doctor, with all due respect, we brought her here because she needs help. And with all due respect, Dr. Carter replied, my job is to determine what kind of help is appropriate. There it was, authority, not loud, not aggressive, but firm enough that it couldn't be ignored. The conversation continued quieter now. Too quiet for me to hear clearly. But I could feel it. The tension. The unraveling. After a few minutes, the door opened again. Doctor. Carter stepped back inside. Daniel followed immediately behind him. Melissa close at his side. Their expressions told me everything. Daniel's calm had cracks in it now. Melissa's composure had hardened into something sharper. What's going on? Daniel asked, his voice tight despite his attempt to keep it even. Dr. Carter didn't sit down this time. He remained standing. I'm delaying the admission, he said. The words landed like a stone. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry, what I'm not admitting her at this time, Dr. Carter repeated. There are inconsistencies in the information provided that need to be clarified. Daniel let out a short, incredulous laugh. Inconsistencies. She's confused, that's the inconsistency. No, Dr. Carter said calmly. The inconsistency is in the documentation. Melissa stepped forward. This is ridiculous, she said. We're trying to get her the care she needs. And I'm trying to ensure that care is appropriate and lawful, Dr. Carter replied. Lawful. That word changed everything. I saw it happen in Daniel's face. A flicker. A realization. Something he hadn't anticipated. You think we're doing something wrong? Daniel asked, his voice sharpening. I think Dr. Carter said carefully that I need to verify consent, medical necessity, and the accuracy of the records before proceeding. And how long is that going to take? Melissa demanded. As long as it needs to. Silence. Then Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Look, he said, shifting his tone again, softer now, almost pleading. We're just trying to help her. She's not safe on her own anymore. I spoke then. For the first time since they re-entered the room. I am safe, I said. Daniel turned to me immediately. Mom, please, no, I said, my voice steady. You don't get to speak for me anymore. The room went still, not dramatically, but completely. Dr. Carter didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Because this moment wasn't about him. It was about control. And who had it? Daniel stared at me, something raw and unfamiliar, flickering behind his eyes. You don't understand what's happening, he said. No, I replied. I understand it perfectly. Another silence. He looked at Dr. Carter, then back at me, and for the first time he looked uncertain. That was when Dr. Carter made his next move. I've contacted Adult Protective Services, he said. The words dropped into the room like a breaking point. Daniel froze. What he said. I've also requested a welfare check through local law enforcement, Dr. Carter continued, given the discrepancies in documentation and the concerns raised by Mrs. Bennett. Concerns raised? Melissa snapped. She's making things up, no, Dr. Carter said. She's answering questions clearly and consistently. That doesn't mean it means I take her statements seriously. Daniel took a step forward. This is unbelievable, he said. You're going to call the police on us for trying to get our mother help. I'm ensuring that her rights are protected, Dr. Carter replied. Her rights, Daniel repeated, his voice rising slightly. What about our rights as her family? Family does not override consent, Doctor, Carter said. That was it. That was the moment everything shifted beyond repair. Daniel's composure cracked completely. This is a mistake, he said sharply. You're making a serious mistake. No, Doctor, Carter said. I'm preventing one. Outside, faint but unmistakable sirens. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Melissa turned toward the window instinctively. Daniel didn't move. He just stood there, staring at Dr. Carter, then at me. And I saw it then. Not anger, not frustration. Fear. Because for the first time he understood this wasn't going to go the way he planned, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The sound of sirens does something strange to the body. Even when they're not meant for you, they carry a weight, a signal that something is about to change whether you're ready for it or not. In that moment, sitting in that small office, I realized those sirens were not just approaching the building, they were approaching the truth. No one spoke at first. Melissa had moved closer to the window, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on something outside I couldn't see. Daniel stood where he was, his jaw tight, his breathing controlled but uneven. Dr. Carter remained still, calm, unmoved, as if he had already stepped into a different version of this moment, one where the outcome was no longer uncertain. You didn't have to do this, Daniel said, finally, his voice low-strained. Dr. Carter didn't respond. You could have just admitted her, Daniel continued. That's what we came here for. That's not how this works, Dr. Carter replied. Daniel let out a sharp breath. No, he said, that's exactly how this works. Families bring people in when they need help. Doctors do their job. People get care. Doctor, Carter's expression didn't change. Care requires consent or clear medical necessity, he said. I don't have either. You have our word, Daniel insisted. I don't rely on that. The simplicity of that answer seemed to hit harder than anything else, because it stripped away the one thing Daniel had been depending on: authority without question. The sirens grew louder, closer. Melissa turned back into the room. They're here, she said. Not panicked. Not yet. But the edge in her voice was unmistakable. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his expression shifting once more, trying even now to regain control. All right, he said, forcing calm into his tone. We can clear this up. It's just a misunderstanding. He looked at me. Mom, tell them you've been confused. That's all this is. You just got overwhelmed. I held his gaze. No, I said, one word. But it carried everything. He stared at me for a long second, disbelief flashing across his face. You don't mean that, he said quietly. I do. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Firm. Official. Dr. Carter stepped forward and opened it. 2 police officers stood in the hallway, both composed, both alert, their presence filling the space in a way that shifted the atmosphere instantly. After noon, one of them said, We got a call about a possible situation involving an involuntary admission. That's correct, Doctor, Carter replied. Thank you for coming. The officers stepped inside. Their eyes moved quickly, taking in the room, the people, the tension. Who is Charlotte Bennett? One of them asked. I am, I said, standing slowly. The officer nodded. Ma'am, we'd like to ask you a few questions if that's all right. It is, I replied. Daniel stepped forward immediately. She's not in a condition to. She just said she is, the officer interrupted calmly. Daniel stopped. Just like that. The authority had shifted again. The officers turned their attention fully to me. Do you understand where you are right now? The second officer asked. Yes, I said. I was brought here under false pretenses. Did you agree to be admitted to this facility? No. Have you been diagnosed with any condition that would prevent you from making your own decisions? No. Each question was clear. Each answer clearer. The first officer nodded slowly, then glanced toward Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter spoke without hesitation. In my professional opinion, she is oriented, coherent, and capable of making her own decisions. There is no immediate medical justification for involuntary admission. The room went still again. But this time, it felt different. Not tense. Resolved. Daniel stepped forward again, his voice rising despite his effort to control it. This is ridiculous, he said. You're taking her word over ours. We're assessing the situation based on all available information, the officer replied evenly. She's not well, Melissa added quickly. She's been forgetting things, acting irrational. Do you have medical documentation confirming that? The officer asked. Melissa hesitated. Just long enough. Daniel jumped in. We brought her here for evaluation. That's what this is. And the evaluation is ongoing, the officer said. Which is why we're here. Daniel ran a hand through his hair again, frustration breaking through more clearly now. This is a waste of time, he muttered. No, I said. He looked at me. This is the first time anyone has actually listened. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Then his expression changed. Not to anger, not exactly. To something colder. You think this ends here, he said quietly. I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to. The officers stepped slightly closer, not aggressively, but enough to make their presence unmistakable. Sir, one of them said, we're going to need you to step back. Daniel didn't move right away. Then slowly he did. Melissa stayed where she was, her arms crossed tightly, her face unreadable. The first officer turned back to me. Ma'am, do you feel safe leaving with them today? He asked, nodding slightly toward Daniel and Melissa. The question was simple, but it carried everything. For years, I had answered questions like that with hesitation, with consideration, with the instinct to protect the people who were supposed to protect me. Not anymore. No, I said. Clear, certain, final. Something in my chest shifted as I said it. Not relief, not yet, but something close. The officer nodded. All right, he said. Then we'll make sure you leave here safely. Daniel let out a sharp breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You're really doing this, he said more to himself than to anyone else. I watched him, this man, this stranger wearing the face of my son, and for the first time I didn't feel confusion, or even heartbreak. I felt clarity, because whatever came next, whatever consequences followed, this moment had already changed everything. I had not disappeared. I had not been silenced. And most importantly, I had said no. The moment I said no did not feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of something heavier. Because when truth finally steps into the room, it doesn't just expose what's happening, it forces everything that follows to face it. The officers didn't rush. That was something I noticed immediately. There was no chaos, no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation like you might expect. Instead, everything shifted into a slower, more deliberate rhythm, as if the situation had crossed into a space where every word mattered. "Ma'am," one of the officers said gently, "we're going to step outside for a moment and figure out the next steps. Would you like to come with us?" I nodded. Yes. I didn't look at Daniel when I said it. I didn't look at Melissa either. Because if I had, I might have seen something that made this harder. And I couldn't afford that. "Not now, Doctor." Carter walked with us into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting everything in a pale, unkind glow. It made the building feel even more hollow, more temporary, like a place meant for people who weren't expected to stay visible for long. Outside, the air felt different. Not cleaner, just open. And after everything that had happened, open felt like something I had almost forgotten existed. One of the officers guided me to a shaded area near the entrance. "You're doing all right," he said. "We just need to ask a few more questions, okay? I understand," I replied. He nodded, then glanced at his partner who had stepped a few feet away to speak into a radio. "Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" he asked. The question caught me off guard, because for the first time since all of this began, I had to think about what came next, not just what I was escaping. "I have a friend," I said. "Lorraine Hayes. She lives about 20 minutes from here. Would you feel safe staying with her?" "Yes." He nodded again, making a note on a small pad in his hand. "All right. We can arrange that." Behind us, through the glass doors, I could see Daniel and Melissa inside. They weren't sitting anymore. They were standing, talking. Arguing, though, I couldn't hear the words. Daniel's movements were sharper now, more restless. Melissa's posture was rigid, her arms tight across her chest, her face set in something that looked less like anger and more like calculation. They were adjusting, recalculating, because whatever plan they had built, whatever steps they thought would lead them to control, had just collapsed. "Charlotte," I turned. Lorraine's voice. Real. Immediate. She was hurrying toward me across the parking lot, her expression a mix of worry and determination. She must have come as soon as she realized something was wrong when I didn't answer, when the call cut off, when something didn't feel right. "Lorraine," I said, and for the first time that day my voice wavered. She reached me quickly, taking both of my hands in hers. "What happened?" she asked. "I came to your house, but no one was there. Then I called again, and nothing. I didn't know what to think." I looked at her. Really looked. And I saw it, the concern, the clarity, the recognition of who I was. Not confusion, not doubt. Just belief. "They tried to put me somewhere," I said quietly. "Without my consent." Her grip tightened. Who she asked, though, I think she already knew. "Daniel," I said. "And Melissa." She didn't react immediately. Not with shock, not with disbelief, but with something deeper, understanding. "I knew something was off," she said. "The way he's been talking about you lately, it didn't sit right." The officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, are you Lorraine Hayes?" "Yes," she said, turning to him. "We're confirming that Charlotte can stay with you for now," he explained, "until everything is sorted out." "Of course she can," Lorraine said firmly. "She's coming with me." No hesitation, no conditions, just certainty. I felt something shift again. Not just relief, but grounding. For the first time in weeks, I knew where I was going. And it wasn't somewhere chosen for me. It was somewhere chosen by me. Meanwhile, inside the building, things were escalating. One of the officers who had remained inside stepped out, his expression more serious now. "They're not cooperating," he said quietly to his partner. I didn't need clarification. I knew exactly who he meant. Daniel. Melissa. Still trying to control something that had already slipped out of their hands. "They'll need to answer some questions," the officer continued. "There are concerns about documentation, possible financial exploitation, and attempted involuntary placement without proper authorization." The words were clinical, measured, but their meaning was anything but. Daniel had crossed a line, and now others could see it too. I watched as the officers re-entered the building. Lorraine stood beside me, her presence steady, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "You're safe now," she said. Safe. The word felt unfamiliar, not because I didn't understand it, but because I hadn't felt it in so long. "I think I am," I replied. But even as I said it, I knew something important. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because what had happened today wasn't just about stopping them. It was about uncovering everything they had already done, and I had seen enough to know this went deeper than just that building, deeper than just one plan, deeper than just one day. Daniel hadn't acted suddenly. He had been preparing, and preparation leaves traces. Paper, money, decisions, changes, all of it waiting to be uncovered. I looked back at the building one last time, at the place where I had almost disappeared, and I realized something with absolute clarity. I hadn't just escaped, I had interrupted something much bigger than I had fully understood before. And now it was going to come into the light. There is a strange kind of quiet that follows survival, not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes when the immediate danger has passed, but the truth behind it has not yet fully surfaced. That was the silence that settled over Lorraine's house that evening. Her home was warm in a way mine hadn't felt in weeks. The curtains were drawn just enough to soften the late afternoon light, and the faint scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. It should have been comforting, and it was. But beneath that comfort was something else. A question. How much had I almost lost? Without even knowing, Lorraine sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched in several minutes. "I still can't believe this," she said quietly. "Daniel, doing something like this." I didn't answer right away, because disbelief, I had learned, was often just a delay before understanding. "I can," I said finally. She looked up at me, surprised. "You can, yes." The word came out steady. Not bitter, not angry, just certain. "Because it didn't start today," I continued. "It's been building for months. I just didn't want to see it for what it was." Lorraine leaned back slightly, processing that. "What exactly did you find?" she asked. I took a breath. "Forged documents," I said. "Power of attorney papers with my name on them. Signatures that weren't mine." Her eyes widened. "And more," I added. "A brochure for that place they took me to. Information about long-term placement." Lorraine shook her head slowly. "That's not just wrong, Charlotte," she said. "That's criminal." "I know. And I did. Not just in theory, but in a way that had settled into my bones." There was a knock at the door. Lorraine stood immediately crossing the room to answer it. I didn't need to guess who it was. When she opened the door, I heard a familiar voice. "Miss Hayes, I'm Richard Collins." Relief moved through me before I even saw him. Mr. Collins had been our family attorney for over 20 years. He had handled everything from our will to the transfer of assets after Thomas passed. He knew our history. More importantly, he knew what things were supposed to look like. "Richard," Lorraine said, stepping aside. "Please come in." He entered with a brief nod, his expression serious but not alarmed. "Charlotte," he said when he saw me. "I came as soon as I was contacted." "Thank you," I replied. He set his briefcase down on the table and took a seat across from me, his movements calm, efficient. "I've been informed there are concerns regarding unauthorized documents and attempted institutional placement," he said. "That's correct," I said. "Then we need to review everything carefully," he replied, "starting with your current legal protections." I nodded, because this was the part Daniel hadn't expected, the part he thought he had already secured. "Daniel told me you were experiencing cognitive decline," Mr. Collins continued. "He contacted my office about 2 weeks ago asking about activating certain provisions." Lorraine stiffened. "What provisions?" she asked. Mr. Collins glanced at her briefly, then back at me. "Contingency clauses related to incapacity," he said. "Standard in most estate plans." "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "That such provisions require independent medical verification," he replied. "Not family opinion." A small, quiet relief settled in my chest. He hadn't believed Daniel outright. He had followed the law. But that didn't mean Daniel hadn't tried. He also asked about transferring certain assets, Mr. Collins added, which raised concerns given the lack of proper documentation. "What kind of assets?" Lorraine asked. Mr. Collins opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Bank accounts. Property inquiries. There was even a preliminary contact with a real estate agent. The room went still. "Selling the house?" Lorraine asked. "Attempting to," he confirmed. Though nothing was finalized, I closed my eyes briefly. Not out of weakness. Out of clarity. Because now I could see it. The full picture. This hadn't been about care. Not even partially. This had been about removal. Removing me from the house. Removing me from decision-making. Removing me from ownership. So everything else could be taken. What about the trust? I asked. Mr. Collins looked at me carefully. Ah, he said, that's where things become interesting. Lorraine leaned forward. What do you mean? Mr. Collins folded his hands on the table. Your husband made some adjustments to the estate plan about a year before his passing, he said. I felt something shift. A year before, I repeated. Yes, he said. At the time, he expressed concerns about potential financial instability within the family. Daniel. It had to be. What kind of adjustments? I asked. Mr. Collins met my eyes. The house is held in a protective trust, he said. It cannot be sold or transferred without your explicit consent or a formal declaration of incapacity made by an independent medical board. Silence. Then Lorraine let out a slow breath. So Daniel couldn't just take it, she said. No, Mr. Collins replied. Not legally. I felt something rise inside me. Not anger. Not even relief. Something deeper. Recognition. Thomas had known. Somehow, he had seen something I hadn't. He also structured the majority of liquid assets. Similarly, Mr. Collins continued. Limited access without oversight. Lorraine shook her head again. So all of this, she said, gesturing vaguely, was for nothing. No, I said quietly. They both looked at me. Not for nothing, I continued. For exposure. Because that was the truth. Daniel hadn't been close to succeeding. He had been close to revealing himself. And now he had. Mr. Collins nodded slightly. Your husband was very clear about one thing, he said. He wanted to ensure that no single individual could override your autonomy without proper checks in place. Autonomy. The word settled into me like something I had almost forgotten I still possessed. So what happens now? Lorraine asked. Mr. Collins closed the folder. Now, he said, everything Daniel attempted will be reviewed. Legally, she asked. Yes. And the documents? I added. If they are indeed forged, he said, there will be consequences. Consequences. The word didn't feel satisfying. It felt necessary. I sat back in my chair, absorbing everything. The fear that had followed me for weeks didn't disappear, but it changed. Because now it wasn't just mine. It was visible, documented, understood. Daniel had tried to rewrite my life, but he had overlooked something critical. The truth had already been written, long before he tried to erase it, and now it was going to be read. The truth does not explode all at once. It unfolds, slowly, deliberately. And when it does, it doesn't just expose what happened, it reveals who people really are when they believe no one is watching. The days that followed felt suspended between two worlds. On one side, there was safety, Lorraine's home, the quiet routine of morning coffee, the steady reassurance of someone who saw me clearly. On the other side, there was everything waiting to be uncovered. And it didn't take long. Within 48 hours, formal steps had already begun. Mr. Collins coordinated with investigators. Adult Protective Services opened a case. Financial records were requested. Documents were reviewed. And the more they looked, the more they found. I wasn't present for the first official meeting, but I didn't need to be. Because when Mr. Collins returned that afternoon, I could see it in his face before he even spoke. It's worse than we thought, he said. Lorraine set her mug down slowly. How much worse? She asked. Mr. Collins didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a thick file on the table between us. This isn't just about attempted placement, he said. It's about a pattern. I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap. What kind of pattern? I asked. He opened the file. Unauthorized access to accounts, he said. Small withdrawals at first. Nothing large enough to trigger immediate concern. How small? Lorraine asked. 200 here. 500 there. Spread out over months. I closed my eyes briefly. Because I remembered. Moments when balances felt off. Times I had dismissed it as error. As forgetfulness. As something I had done without realizing. They were testing the boundaries, I said quietly. Mr. Collins nodded. Yes, he said, and escalating. He turned another page. Password changes, he continued. Mail redirection requests. Attempts to reroute financial statements. Lorraine looked at me, her expression tightening. They were isolating you, she said. Yes, I replied, but saying it out loud made it different, more real, more complete. This wasn't a single act. It was a process, a system. designed to reduce me piece by piece until I was no longer seen as someone capable of questioning anything. "What about the documents?" I asked. Mr. Collins flipped to another section. "Preliminary analysis confirms irregularities in the signatures," he said. "Enough to warrant formal examination." "And if they're confirmed as forged?" Lorraine asked. "Then we're looking at fraud," he said. "Possibly more." The room fell quiet again. Not heavy, not oppressive, just final. Because now there was no ambiguity left, no room for interpretation. Daniel hadn't made a mistake. He had made choices. And those choices had consequences. "I want to be present when they question him," I said. Lorraine looked at me immediately. "Charlotte, I need to," I said. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of something deeper. Closure. Mr. Collins considered that for a moment. "That may be possible," he said, "but you need to be prepared." For what I asked, for the possibility that he won't admit anything he said, or that he'll try to justify it. I nodded slowly. "I understand." And I did, because I knew Daniel. Or at least I knew the version of him that had been revealed, the version that didn't see this as betrayal, but as entitlement. The meeting took place 2 days later. Not in a courtroom, not yet, but in a quiet office where everything felt too controlled to be comfortable. I sat beside Mr. Collins, Lorraine just behind me, across the table Daniel, and Melissa. Seeing them there felt surreal, not because I hadn't expected it, but because they didn't look broken. They looked irritated, defensive, as if this entire situation was an inconvenience rather than a consequence. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed loosely. Melissa sat upright, her expression composed but tense. Neither of them spoke at first. Neither of them looked at me. That more than anything told me they already understood what this was. "This is a formal review of recent actions concerning Charlotte Bennett," the investigator began. "We're here to establish a clear understanding of events." Daniel exhaled softly. "Look," he said, "I think this has all been blown out of proportion. I didn't react, because I had expected that. We were trying to help her," he continued. "She's not capable of managing things the way she used to." "And what led you to that conclusion?" the investigator asked. Daniel hesitated, just slightly. "She forgets things," he said. "She gets confused." "Can you provide specific examples?" the investigator asked. Daniel opened his mouth, then paused. "Because general statements are easy. Details are not." Melissa stepped in. "She's been declining for months," she said. "We were concerned about her safety." "Were those concerns documented by a licensed medical professional?" the investigator asked. "No," she admitted. "But we were trying to get that documentation," Daniel added quickly. "That's why we took her to the facility." "Without her consent," the investigator noted. "She didn't understand what was best for her," Melissa said. That was the moment I spoke. "I understood exactly what you were doing," I said. Both of them turned to look at me. "For the first time since the meeting began. You were trying to remove me from my own life," I continued, "and you thought I wouldn't notice." Daniel's expression hardened. "That's not true," he said. "Then explain the documents," I replied. Silence. I leaned forward slightly. "The power of attorney forms," I said, "with my forged signature." Daniel didn't answer. Melissa looked at him, then back at me. "That's not what that was," she said. "Then what was it?" I asked. Another silence, longer this time, because there was no answer that could reshape what had already been exposed. The investigator spoke again. "We also have records of unauthorized financial activity," he said. "Would you like to address?" That Daniel shook his head slightly, his composure slipping just enough to be visible now. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. No denial, no explanation, just deflection. And that was when I understood something completely. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even ashamed. He was frustrated, because it hadn't worked. And that was the final truth. Not just about what he had done, but about who he had become. I sat back slowly, my hands resting in my lap. Not trembling, not uncertain, just still. Because the hardest part, the part where I questioned myself, doubted myself, wondered if I was losing something I couldn't get back, that part was over. Now there was only one thing left: to let the truth stand. Without apology, without fear, and without silence. After the meeting, the world did not suddenly feel lighter. If anything, it felt heavier. Because clarity has weight. It settles into every corner of your life, reshaping how you see the past, the present, and the future all at once. Lorraine drove me home 2 days later, not to her house, to mine. I hadn't been back since that morning, since Daniel had taken my keys, since I had stepped into the car believing I was going to a doctor's appointment and nearly disappeared instead. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition. The house looked the same. The same white siding. The same garden I had spent years tending. The same front porch where Thomas used to sit in the evenings watching the sun drop behind the trees. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "You don't have to go in right away," Lorraine said gently. I nodded. But I opened the door anyway, because avoiding it wouldn't make it mine again. Only facing it would. The air inside was still, too still, as if the house had been holding its breath. I stepped inside slowly, my hand brushing lightly against the wall as I moved through the entryway. Every object felt familiar but distant, like I was walking through a memory instead of a home. "They've already been here," I said quietly. Lorraine followed me in. "What do you mean I moved into the living room?" Things were slightly off. Not dramatically, but enough. A drawer not fully closed. A stack of mail shifted. A chair angled just a little differently than I remembered. "They came back," I said. "After the facility." Lorraine's expression hardened. "They shouldn't have," she said. "No," I replied. "But they did." Because Daniel had never been someone who accepted limits easily. Even now, even after everything, part of him must have believed he could still fix this. Still control it. Still finish what he started. I walked into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, closed it again. Not searching, just confirming. This was still my space, even if it didn't feel like it yet. "I'll stay with you tonight," Lorraine said. I shook my head gently. "I need to be here alone," I said. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, because this return was something I had to do on my own." She studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will." After she left, the silence settled again. But this time it felt different. Not oppressive, not threatening, just quiet. I moved through the house slowly, room by room, touching things, straightening them, reclaiming them. In the bedroom, I paused. The bed was still made the way I had left it. The cardigan I hadn't worn that morning lay folded on the chair. Everything looked untouched. And yet, I knew better. Because trust once broken doesn't return just because the room looks the same. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since everything began, I let myself feel it. Not the fear, not the anger, the loss. Not just of safety, not just of certainty, but of something deeper. The belief that the person you raised would never be the one to harm you. That belief doesn't shatter loudly. It dissolves, quietly, until one day you realize it's gone. I didn't cry. Not then. Because what I felt wasn't something that needed release. It needed understanding. And understanding takes time. The next morning I woke up early, but because I could. There was no one watching me. No one deciding where I would go. No one speaking over me. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time in weeks, the silence felt like mine. Later that day, there was a knock at the door. I knew who it would be before I opened it. Dr. Carter. He stood on the porch looking slightly out of place in the daylight, as if the world outside that facility didn't quite belong to him yet. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're not," I replied. "Please come in." He stepped inside, glancing around briefly. "This is very different from where we met," he said. "Yes," I said, "it is." We sat in the living room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he cleared his throat. "I wanted to check on you," he said, "and to let you know that I've submitted a full report." "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "You did something very important," he continued. "A lot of people in your position don't get the chance to be heard." "I almost didn't," I said. "But you were," he replied. I looked at him. "You believed me," I said. He shook his head slightly. "I listened," he said. "That's all." But it wasn't all. Listening in a moment like that was everything. "You changed what would have happened to me," I said. He didn't respond immediately. Because some truths don't need to be confirmed. They're already understood. After he left, I sat for a long time in the quiet. not thinking about Daniel, not thinking about Melissa, but thinking about something else. What comes after survival, because stopping something is not the same as healing from it, and healing, I realized, was going to be the harder part, not because I didn't know what had happened, but because I did, because I understood it clearly, because there were no illusions left to hide behind, only truth. And truth, no matter how necessary, always leaves something behind that has to be rebuilt. But as I sat there in my home, in my life, in my own space, I realized something else. I had not just survived what they tried to do, I had stopped it. And that meant something, not just for me, but for who I would become after this. There is a quiet moment that comes after everything has been exposed, confronted, and set into motion. A moment where life does not return to what it was, but instead asks you a different question. Who are you now? Not who you were before. Not who others believed you to be, but who you choose to become after you have seen the truth. In the weeks that followed, my life did not fall apart. It rearranged itself, slowly, deliberately, with intention. The legal process continued as Mr. Collins had promised it would. I was not present for every step, but I stayed informed. Reports were filed, documents were reviewed, the forged signatures underwent formal examination, they were confirmed. There was no ambiguity left. Daniel and Melissa's actions were no longer something that could be explained away as concern or misunderstanding. They had crossed into something undeniable, something that carried consequences beyond the walls of our family. I was asked more than once how I felt about that, whether I wanted to press forward, whether I wanted to pursue everything to its full extent. The question wasn't simple, because it wasn't just about justice, it was about identity. For so many years I had defined myself through my roles: wife, mother, caretaker, someone who absorbed discomfort so that others wouldn't have to feel it, someone who believed that love meant patience, forgiveness, and endurance. And for a long time that belief had served me, until it didn't. Until it became the very thing that allowed someone to believe they could take everything from me without consequence. So when I was asked what I wanted, I answered differently than I might have before. I want the truth to stand, I said, not vengeance, not punishment, truth. Because once truth is clear, everything else follows. I made changes, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Mr. Collins helped me update every legal document connected to my life. Additional safeguards were put in place: independent oversight, medical advocacy requirements, clear limitations on access to my finances. Not because I expected this to happen again, but because I understood now that protection is not about distrust, it's about clarity. I also made a decision that surprised even me. I volunteered, not at a library, not in the quiet, familiar spaces I had always gravitated toward, but with a local elder advocacy organization. The first time I walked into that office, I felt something I hadn't expected. Recognition, not of faces, but of stories, different names, different details, but the same patterns: isolation, control, doubt. And in many cases, silence. Women who had felt something was wrong but didn't know how to prove it. Women who had been told they were confused until they began to question themselves. Women who had nearly disappeared into decisions made for them. I listened, the same way Dr. Carter had listened to me, not interrupting, not correcting, just hearing. And slowly I began to understand something deeper than anything I had learned before. What happened to me wasn't rare. It was hidden, and hidden things don't stop unless they are brought into the light. I never spoke publicly about Daniel, not in detail, not with anger, because this was no longer about him. It was about what I had almost lost, and what I had chosen to reclaim. There were moments, quiet ones, when I still felt the weight of it. When I would pass by a photograph of Daniel as a child and feel something shift inside me. Not longing, not regret, something more complex. Grief for a version of him that no longer existed. But I didn't let that grief define me, because I had already spent too much time living inside something that was no longer real. Instead, I focused on what was: my home, my choices, my voice, and the understanding that none of those things are guaranteed, but they can be protected. One afternoon, I sat in the garden behind my house, the same place where I had once collapsed under the summer heat. The air was cooler now, softer. I held a small notebook in my hands. Not the hidden notes, not the records, just a simple notebook. I opened it, and for a moment I hesitated, because writing had once been about survival. Now, it was about something else. I began to write. Not reminders, not warnings, just truth. I am here. I understand what happened, and I am still myself. The words felt different. Not defensive, not urgent, just steady. I closed the notebook and looked out across the yard. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And that made everything else feel different, because the most important thing I had learned through all of this was not how easily someone can try to take your life away from you, but how powerful it is to say no, to be heard, to be seen, and to choose even after everything, to remain. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayal does not come from strangers, it comes from the people we trust the most, not because we are weak, but because we believe in love. We believe that the roles we hold, mother, wife, family, protect us from harm. We believe that our sacrifices will be remembered, that our care will be returned, that the people we raise will never see us as something to control. But life doesn't always follow that belief. And when that truth reveals itself, it can feel like everything we understood has been taken from us. But it hasn't. Because what truly belongs to you, your voice, your awareness, your ability to choose, cannot be taken unless you are convinced to give it away. That is why this story matters. Not because it is rare, but because it is real. And because so many people, especially women who have spent their lives caring for others, forget that they are still allowed to protect themselves. You are allowed to question. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to be heard. And most importantly, you are allowed to remain yourself no matter who tries to define you otherwise. If this story touched you, I'd truly love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now where you are? Have you ever had a moment where you realized something wasn't right, but no one else seemed to see it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories that give a voice to people who almost lost theirs, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes being heard is the beginning of everything.